Eating disorders are a mental illness, even if they're not always thought of it that way. Hillary Pacha is an eating disorder recovery coach. She opened a nonprofit in Bloomington called One Hope Project to help those with eating disorders 4 years ago this week, right before the pandemic hit. And during this time of growing mental health concerns, more and more people are turning to her for help. Pacha says the pandemic has had a significant impact on individuals' mental health. She says demand has grown so much her office now has a waiting list for individual counseling services. In this edition of Sound Health, Pacha tells WGLT student reporter Megan Sperline the driving force behind the nonprofit was both professional and personal.
I personally have struggled with an eating disorder from a very young age, off and on over the years, and it really kind of got kind of hit a peak, if you will, right after having my son, who's now 13. So it's been a while, and that was when I was really like, I need my own help, and so I went on a journey to get help, and there really was nothing in the area to help. I'm an advocate at heart, and I was able to persevere, but I just remember thinking nobody should have to work this hard to get the help that they need and deserve. And then professionally, because I've been in this community all my life, and my background is nonprofits, and no matter what population of folks that I was working with at a nonprofit, what stood out to me was there was always clients who would say that they struggled with an eating disorder or body image issues or disordered eating. And so that kind of stood out to me too. So I guess, in 2020 was when I decided enough's enough, and I wanted to fill a need and a void that was in our community. We have a lot of great services, but eating disorders is not one of them.
Are there any particular eating disorders or treatments that you guys focus on?
Eating disorders and where we're kind of at as a culture are kind of behind the times in the sense of, I always equate it to, because I have a background in working in domestic violence and sexual assault, and it reminds me of eating disorders is kind of where domestic violence, sexual assault was 20 years ago. So not a lot of people, maybe, yes, people have heard of it. They've heard of maybe anorexia or bulimia, maybe binge eating, but they know very little. And there's a lot of stigma around it. And so I think a lot of people think, oh, it's choice, or is it really that big of a problem? And so I think that is part of it. And so part of what we do at One Hope Project is bringing the education awareness, but our focus isn't on any particular eating disorder. In fact, somebody doesn't have to have an eating disorder diagnosis to come and get services. If they simply have, maybe an unhealthy relationship with food, or struggle with body image, some things that maybe put them at risk for developing an eating disorder, then we work with those clients as well.
And what would you say is the mission of One Hope Project, or what kind of messages are you hoping to send to the Bloomington normal community?
Yes. So obviously we do have our mission to help people on their journey to recovery, but I think really some of the takeaways that I really want to our community to know and get behind is really recognizing that eating disorders are a mental illness. So a lot of times people think it's a choice, or they have a lot of different misconceptions about eating disorders and what they are, but it is a mental illness. And it's time we kind of, I think, really realize that, because we have a lot of great services in our community for mental health. So kind of letting, eating disorders have a seat at the proverbial table. So, pun intended or not intended, I'm not sure, but, it's time for eating disorders to have a seat at the table when we're talking about mental health, and so that it is a problem and it does exist in our community, even though people haven't maybe seen it as much. And that's because there hasn't been a One Hope Project. And so not only is it a mental health issue, but it actually has the highest mortality rate than any other mental illness, yet it's the most underfunded. And so we're kind of in an uphill battle. There's a lot of people coming in our doors now.
That was Hillary Pacha with the One Hope Project in Bloomington, speaking with WGLT student reporter Megan Sperline. One Hope has hosted 2 events this week to mark Eating Disorders Week. One was a virtual workshop on stigma around eating disorders and diet culture. The other was a yoga class on body gratitude.
Support for WGLT health coverage comes from Carle Health. You can count on Carle as your partner in healthcare. Information at carle.org.